Halo? Startujemy? A, no to już krzyczcie panowie, żebyśmy tak...
Ladies and gentlemen, we should be saying welcome, good morning. So good morning, it's yet another day of this conference. Luckily, it's not my turn to speak and I can hand over to our esteemed moderators who will be moderating this morning session. Well, moderating and chairing. Good morning.
Serdecznie powitać
I give you my warm welcome. That's the second day of this conference.
We wczorajszym dniu były
Yesterday, we listened to many interesting papers after last night's meeting of this beautiful debating society. Well, I don't see that many faces, but I hope that we'll have more people coming. I would like to thank the organizers for invitation to this conference. And today's session will start with Professor Suchocka's paper and presentation. She will talk about classroom vision or dreams.
Szanowni Państwo, dzień dobry o poranku.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I give you a very good morning. So in reference to yesterday's introductory contribution by Professor Swick, I would like to talk today about architecture and history. And let me start by presenting you a video filmed in a very beautiful venue. So for centuries, actually for 2 centuries, that building has been present, and let us talk about the eternal nature of this structure. So let us watch the film.
Templar.
Powinien być jeszcze głos.
Actually, we are not getting the soundtrack.
Templar.
Byliśmy zatem na Morawach w Czechach. A
So that
chciałbym
was
jeszcze rozważać
Moravia in
kwestię
Czechia.
ciągłości, tak? Bo o tym
And,
mówił profesor Słyk. I tu mamy
I would
też
like
swoistą
to
ciągłość. I teraz,
consider and reflect on continuity. So here we have that specific continuity. So I will have some quotes from some distinguished architects, and I would like us to consider what, why, and where. And I will present you my interpretation of that unique nature of the Tugendhat villa. So any the experience bring us some important experience of architecture and the space and time, they melt into one substance that transpires through our awareness. So we are relating to history because history creates what we have now. So what is happening now, it is happening in history. If it wasn't for the heritage, we wouldn't be going for the best, because architecture is based on the achievements so far. It is based on the support from thinking, from artificial intelligence, international way of thinking. These days, information travels faster, so that past is necessary to create a perfect future. A piece of architecture should last until the future, but as Rasmussen said, not all works of art can exist like that. At the stage of designing, a building should be the avant-garde of its time. So the Tugendhat villa is an avant-garde building, and I believe that in the coming years and decades, it would look like a building that was created yesterday. Then we have that need to function, to operate, which is combined with this perfect feeling and idea of an order of the architect. They form a perfect image. Tatarkiewicz also said that because of number, everything looks perfect, ideal. Let us go back to the Pythagoreans. So they reconfirmed their actions and they operated because of geometry. So they were not guided by the appearance. They were guided by the truth that could be calculated and presented by a figure, by a formula, and this way perfect structures could be created. As some have already said here, that feeling of understanding and seeing these buildings that last until now, even as ruins, that all tells us about what was happening yesterday. So we have this image of architecture that has left a trace on us, on our soul. So that accompanies us and takes us forward. So we should have respect for context and for what we have, but we should be able to mark with contemporary accents these things. So we design space, so these space are not only replicas and quotes from the past, because it would no longer be the experience of encountering something new. It's about subtlety, it's about the right creation, it's about combination that creates and brings about a perfect piece of work. Haydenowicz said that we must remember that the quality of living environment and standards come as a result of creative heritage, architecture of past periods that could become the basis for today's architectural creation. If we collect all quotations from the world, they could form this common idea or statement. A piece of architecture should survive into very remote future. So let us go back to the Tugendhat villa. It's a timeless structure, perfect form, which is harmonious and well balanced. And I was endeavoring to refer that structure to a piece of visual art, which is a painting by Starzewski. But for now, we are in the villa that subtly introduces the visitor to its beauty. So we have the glass panes that glister and glimmer in the sun when we have this round depth of that element of the composition. When turning its back to the bypassers in the street, they couldn't keep their intimacy, so all their life was taking place from the side of the garden with the beautiful panorama of the city of Brno on the top of the hill. So if we now refer to a piece of visual art, we could say that an image is perfect or a picture is perfect when you cannot add anything or take anything from it. So any interference will disrupt the perfection of the composition. So when we look at the layout and how this villa has been designed, we can see that simple, well-designed visual form. So we could see that symmetry and compositional order. There was a partition wall, which was the main axis for the composition and for the house. Then we have a system of artistic forms that led us through all the interior parts, internal parts of the house. Mills van der Rohe, who was the chief architect of that building, was engaged in avant-garde, and the owner, Mr. Tugendhat, had some doubts about this building. This building was extravagant, was quite expensive, whether it made sense, whether it was the right thing to have such an expensive building. But actually, the wooden wall juxtaposed the glass door, and the architect said, well, you could do it in a different way, but commission someone else. So because of the architect's resistance and architect's persistence and perseverance, that building stood and held against the war, held out against the war and the Soviet time, etc. So now it's been turned into a museum that can perfectly reflect the shape and the nature of the building. So looking at these two plans, we have this obvious analogy. If we were to compare the composition of that picture and the design, we have that system and of rectangulars and squares, and then we have the symmetry axis, then we have the circles. So that axis divides that picture into half, and in the layout it also introduces some order into that internal space. Then, if we were to analyze, to go even deeper into the profile, the layout of the villa, we can also refer to this partition wall, which very nicely organizes space, and it crystallizes the space, and it also sets out functional zones because its proportions and functionality and location within the space of the building sets out several functional zones. This partition wall reinforces and stabilizes the layout of the whole system.
W cudzysłowie czyszcząc
And when I was, so to say, cleaning that concept, I've achieved that type of artistic composition. And I believe that if a floor plan is balanced, is well composed, is well thought through, if it's transitioned into a artistic drawing, well, that is the measure of the quality of that composition. Then if we go even further and we allocate some colors to these planes, we have that full and condensed composition, which is vertical in nature, and we have that analogy, so the floor plan and the picture, they have this mutual reference and mutually reflect each other. So we have everything that we knew for a perfect work of art, and then we have that modesty when it comes to the number of details. So that was characteristic of Starzewski and van der Rohe. No unnecessary additions. Then we have all the systems, all the based in the structure based on steel construction. Well, the solid is light, so from the garden, this solid is flowing in the air and offers an insight into the interior. So the architect wanted to combine the interior with the exterior, and he also designed a winter garden inside the villa. Here we may refer to Vitruvius and to the durability, timeliness, and value of a building. And when it comes to the interior and the interior design, so that is again full balance, so no eclectic elements, nothing that could be potentially removed, and or that's even an inviting simplicity and moderation. So that it suggests that that type of building could continue with us longer and longer. If we were to refer to a poet, Przyboś, who worked together with another Polish poet, Tuwim, and they brought together a monography. I have a piece of his poem, fragment of his poem that refers to that villa. Here the moon hung out outside the window, and tapping the plaster fell away as a shadow. The stars flowed down the window pane. There, outside, I will walk, following the traces on the floor with my gaze. The room full of light cannot contain me. Just as I cannot contain me, I feel twice as much in my body. So where we're inside, we can feel that we are in a different world altogether. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave you here with my reflections about the piece of architectural work, about a piece of visual art. So architects for centuries have been walking that road so that they could be positively reflected on in the next centuries. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękujemy za interesującą
So thank you so much for this very interesting presentation, and indeed, Madam Professor, you have chosen a perfect example, a perfect case, and we've been discussing that, and we concluded that this is actually this villa, Tugendhat Villa, that should be the first target for young students to visit. And then when we look at the building, what that building shows that architecture is art. So that's the topic that we are touching upon during this conference. And congratulations on your
Czy mogę
paper.
jeszcze coś dodać?
If I may add something here, Professor. Well, of course.
Tak, właściwie nic nie będę się w ogóle odnosił, znaczy
Actually,
nie śmiałbym nic mówić na
I
temat
wouldn't even
tego
dare
obiektu.
to discuss
Ten obiekt trzeba po prostu zobaczyć.
that
Po prostu w nim być.
building. I would love
I tyle.
to see it. I
Żadne
would love to
komentarze
be inside.
nie
No
oddadzą tego,
comments.
z wyjątkiem
No.
może komentarzy
Well,
pani profesor.
Perhaps except
Nie
for
oddadzą tego, co się czuje
what Madam Professor has
przebywając w tym
just said.
obiekcie
So
i
no words can convey the
odczuwając go wszystkimi zmysłami.
feelings,
Także ten apel,
impressions that one has when inside the building. So actually it makes perfect sense to take our students there
mam dwie refleksje
on
takie
school
odnoszące się.
trip.
Jedną do
But then
tego
I have
obiektu.
two reflections.
Mignęło
The first one
słowo engineering
refers to this building.
na tej
So I
prezentacji.
think that there was
To dzieło potwierdza
something
to, że
in that presentation
po
that
prostu triadę
mentioned
Vitruviuszowską,
engineering,
że
so that
forma
reconfirms
bez
Vitruvius's
struktury
triads,
czy konstrukcji,
meaning that a form without
staje się
structure,
czymś
without
mniej
support,
zrozumiałym, czy czymś
becomes
pustym.
less
Geniusz
comprehensible,
tego
becomes
architekta polegał też na tym, że po
void.
prostu
And actually,
zastosował takie-
this architect
ta forma
was
by nie
a
istniała bez
genius
inwencji
because he
inżynierskiej.
applied that
No i jeszcze jedna
engineering
refleksja,
way of thinking.
dotycząca przyszłości.
And then I have another
To- te
reflections
korelacje
about the
między
past.
rzutem
So we have that
formą
reflection. Well, we have that
architektoniczną, a
relationship.
obrazem, formą plastyczną, no, są oczywiste, ale jakby troszkę
So
zapomniane.
we have that
w tej chwili. Nie wiem, czy pan
relationship
profesor,
between
Bonner
an artistic
przypomina
expression
sobie,
in
kiedy
visual
nasz
art and
patron,
an
profesor
architectural
Gawłowski, zachęcał
plan.
nas.
So our
Tak jest, zachęcał
patron,
nas
Professor
do takich
Gawłowski,
ćwiczeń, które
as I
polegały na
remember, he
malowaniu
encouraged
obrazów
us to
abstrakcyjnych,
paint
które
abstract
transformowaliśmy
paintings.
na rzuty, czy
And
nawet na
then we
plany
would
obiektów i
transpose
nazywaliśmy
them
to
into
optymalizacją.
architectural plans, and we call them optimization. So painters or paintings optimization, that was invented by Le Corbusier. He was the one who was preparing interpretations of his works as paintings. So that was a very interesting method-related approach. Let us proceed. So, Madam, thank you so much again.
And now over to the next speaker. Constellations of Imagination, Professor Claudia Battaino of University of Trento.
Buongiorno a tutti. Thanks, it's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you for the invitation. History and the process of memory, by shaping and transforming the past, play a fundamental role in architectural design. As Ernesto Nanta Rogers argued, they are inseparable for imagination and invention, from the necessary construction of an imaginary intending to generate new form and meanings. Every culture has developed ways to engage with nature, turning necessity into architecture and technique into language. As some of these, due to their fundamental power, endure through the age as a key figure of the collective imagination. Terra's form belongs to such a constellation. They have generated a configuration that exceeded mere agronomic functionality. inscribing into a matter a sense of order, of equilibrium with the environment, and of shared symbolism. It is within this tension between technique and imagination that terraced forms can be understood as a type. Following the definition of Katedra, the type is a generative principle, an archetype that returns across place and times, capable of adapting and renewing itself. From this perspective, the terrace form can be read as a ground choreography, playing, level, and path, acting as a compositional device that sediments memory and use within urban space. And in my presentation, focuses on the construction of imaginary that terracing has represented. Adopting this perspective means reading in the materiality of terraces ground the long cultural process that have made them bears of values and visions. They offers themselves a lens through which to observe the relationship between landscapes and civilization, highlighting continuities and discontinuities, permanence and reinventions. At the architectural scale, this passage translates into invention of the horizontal plane and the ability to regulate level difference. At the urban scale, into the organization of walkable tiers and network of movement. With this passage, the perception of landscape changes, no longer a mere natural backdrop, but a practicable field articulated into planes and gradients to be traversed. Terraces appear as a plinth that establish the ground, as a step that measure ascent, as a ramp that attars rising into narrative. The same elements are amplified into esplanade, civic terraces, streets, and so on. The terraces type is born from the primordial contact between body and ground, but it reaches its completeness where the elementary grammar, that is step, platform, and ramps, becomes an ordering principle of architecture and of a portion of the city. And in this passage, individual experience transfigures into a collective palimpsest, transforming an elementary gesture into a shared structure of memory and design. The act to establish a plane is a symbolic gesture, to separate while at the same time connecting earth and sky, and to generate a place that produces vision and return as image. Within the invention of the first terraces, the imaginary is translated into matter, and the idea takes shapes and embodies form. Architecture can be narrated as an adventure that begins with the ground, with the primordial gesture of raising the earth and arranging it into planes, a platform emerging from the plane, a step taming the slope, a ramp making ancient practicable. And within this elementary grammar lies the promise of the type, the code of platform, steps, Rams recurs across in time and place, as if history had identified a mother form for the expression of worship, power, memory, and landscape. And different civilizations, distant in space and time, share this fundamental framework. In the Greek archaic and riverine civilization, terracing was the principal device of monumentality. In the Greek rock sanctuaries, the horizontal threshold in front of the cliff, the terrace, is not added volume, but a mediating platform separating river and mountain, instituted a ritual plane for worship. In the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, the infrastructural system of masonry terraces, platform, and large foundation controls water and organizes community space. In the sequence platforms at Erebuni, the sequence platform at Erebuni is a proto-urban model in which the natural slope, rewritten into enclosed planes, becomes multi-level architecture. At Persepoli, the type becomes a city podium. In Jerusalem, the sacred platform of the Temple Mount is an artificial ground capable of connecting cult, city, and power, a collective plane, structural access, thresholds, and procession. The Acropolis in Athens, with this sequence of ramps, terraces, makes evident that ancient is not only the reach of the temple. The natural slope is transformed into a promenade architectural. Here, the terraces are no longer topographical necessities, but instruments of perspectival orchestration. And also Pergamon, with its porticos, it is a city that can be read as a sequence of constructed planes where walking becomes narrative and level is language. In the Imperial Forum platform, podia and stairways orchestrate procession while retaining walls and terraces mediate between the hills and plains of Rome. The tabularium of the Capitoline Hill is a monumental base regulating a changing level, transforming containment into architecture of representation. The Terra City is not only a ceremonial center, it is a technical infrastructure where aqueducts, cistern, and drainage system exploit level difference to regulate the flow of water. Latin vocabulary makes it clear. Area, the flat space, gradus, the step, the level, and the podium, the base terrace, are operative words of city making, because the horizontal plane is never neutral. The Italian landscape offers a true library of ground. Horizontal planes establish against gravity, govern gradients and paths, weaving together houses, fields, and city. It is a repertoire of forms that nourish birds, guests, and end. Over time, terraces, once agricultural or religious tools, have become cultural landscapes, an archive of spatial device, and in 20th century, architects and artists encountered this archive as a compositional source, translating terraces into active memory. Alvaralto Terrace Houses is not a house on the ground, but a house that creates ground, repeating with local variation the same logic of rural terraces. Sainazzalo Town Hall, in the Sainazzalo Town Hall, a montage of levels institutes the city as a civic scale, as a succession of artificial horizon in which the community recognizes itself on a shape ground. In the experimental house at Murassalo, a miniature terrace countryside is composed of edge, threshold, plane, and line. In the cemetery of Lingby, a city of dead is organized through planes and threshold, according to the same logic of Mediterranean landscape that architects observe and translate it into a civic right. The lexicon Alto derived from East travel in Italy and can be summarized as follows. The terrace is an habitable threshold, the ramp is a promenade, walls are retaining structure that hold the plane, and light is treated as a horizontal surface. The city is a ground infrastructure. Courts are rise, podium square are step measure civil ritual. At the landscape scale, as in rural terraces, the project uses the same rule, module and variation to generate compositions. Making a plane is not a mere technical expedient, but a choice to construct artificial horizon, to govern difference in level, to choreograph movements. In Behrens, the practicable planes becomes the true projectum, an alphabet of ground. A clear example is the crematorium, where the platform, together with the ground stairways, is not neutral base, but the inaugural act of a ritual. The lap-to type becomes evident in the Terrassenhaus, where the volumes recede in stepped tiers, turning roof into practicable space. The practical plane here becomes a model, from episodic solution to a typological matrix of modern dwelling. This trajectory continues in the Villa Gans, set on a slope, whose volumetry decomposes across multiple levels of loggias, balconies, and terraces, constructing a chain of threshold open toward the landscape. With Plečnik, the theme of making the plane becomes city design. Rather than opposing the new form to topography in Ljubljana, it follows the slope and translates it into a sequence of public platforms. The river is not a margin, but a linear platform. Bridges are not only passage, but open-air rooms that make a plane. Embankments are not hydraulic works, but terraces from which the city gazes at the water. The result is a great inhabitable section. This orchestration of planes is the way Plečnik Mediterraneized Ljubljana. Plečnik systematically works with the triad, plane, level, and path, and the tile is the tool to make the plan practicable. Retaining walls are not technical backdrops, but figures that hold and display the level. and the urban scale, the project of Plečnik focuses on continuous planes of embankments, bridge, markets, and squares that transform natural gradients into infrastructure of the city. In conclusion, terracing is not a mere technique, but a transhistorical composition device that translates functional and symbolic necessities into practicable planes. The ground choreography, the triad plane level path, is the minimal lexicon thrown with architecture and city institute collective space. The cycle worship city cultivation in which the type is born in the sacred, urbanized in Greece and Rome, ruralized in agricultural landscape, and re-emerge as a compositional repertoire in 20th century shows the strength of this type, its transferability across scales, context, and function, provides the operative imaginary with an archive of forms that can still nourish contemporary design practices. Thank you very much for your attention.
Very much. It was, in my opinion, it was a very impressive speech on meaning of architecture and urban forms, and especially interesting fragments was connected with the functional and symbolic meaning of this of these forms. Congratulations. In my opinion, it was very, very nice speech.
Ja za chwilę zapowiem następnego prelegenta, ale dwa zdania zgadzałem się oczywiście z panem profesorem co do znaczenia i wartości tych treści, które przekazała nam pani profesor. Mam takie dwie refleksje, ale nie będę za długo, bo myśmy już poprzednio weszli w dyskusję. Tutaj poruszeni
a while ago moved by great works of architecture. Let me just say one thing.
W naszym kraju zwykle trudniej nam jest zwracać na takie formy, jakie pokazywała pani profesor. Chodzi o propozycję platform, tarasów i tak dalej, bo zostaliśmy urodzeni, wychowani w płaskim, niziemnym kraju. Naprawdę to widać na tych rysunkach, na tych zdjęciach. Inaczej odczuwamy przestrzeń i trudno zresztą nawet taką kompozycję w krajobrazie Mazowsza zrealizować.
To introduce such a composition
wydaje się,
in
że
the
kwestia
Mazovian
klimatu
landscape.
i geografii krajobrazu
Issues
tutaj
such as
odgrywa jednak
landscape,
rolę.
climate do play a role.
Czy pani profesor coś chce dodać do tej prezentacji?
Would like to add something when it comes to the presentation?
Parę słów.
Just a couple of words.
Dyskutując z panem profesorem,
to respond to what you have said.
To ukształtowanie terenu.
I believe that it is not necessarily the landscape that can contribute to constructing terraces.
Już takim wytworem
Terrace buildings
sztucznym, a z
are
takimi też
an
mamy
artificial
do czynienia
object,
w tej przestrzeni takiej
and
płaskiej.
they are
To może
found
tyle.
also
Dziękuję.
in flat areas.
Tak, i zapraszamy
Thank you very
panią
much.
Adę Kwiatkowską
Okay, great. Let us
z
now
Politechniki
move on to the next
Wrocławskiej,
speaker.
której
Ada
wystąpienie jest
Kwiatkowska
zatytułowane
from the
Life and Death
University
of Form
of
in the
Warsaw will speak
Architectural
about life
Universe.
and death in the architectural universe.
Dobrze, dzień dobry, witam Państwa.
Good morning,
Temat został
ladies and
zapowiedziany.
gentlemen.
Moment, tylko sprawdzę.
So I'll talk about life and
Co
death
prawda,
of forming the
To nie
architectural
wiem, czy widać,
universe.
ale generalnie
Well, I
jest
hope
to
you can see the
główne
slide,
punkty mojej prezentacji.
but these are the main
Chciałam
points of
Państwu
my
przedstawić pewne
presentation.
szkoły myślenia
So
o
I would like to
projektowaniu form
present certain
architektonicznych. Właściwie dwie szkoły
concepts,
je ze sobą
schools
skonfrontować,
of
ale pierwszy
thinking
punkt
about
to będzie
architectural
miasto i
design.
historia
But
alternatywne
first, let
kategorii i
me
warstwy
focus
czasu.
on
Potem
cities and
zaprezentuję
alternative
krótko
categories
determinizm,
and
właśnie
research
w oparciu o
methods,
pewne
and then I will
definicje
talk about
czasu.
determinism
I te dwie szkoły to jest historyczny
immortality, and then we have historical contextualism and
i z tym związane źródła formy w obu tych
modernism,
szkołach
which is
myślenia
not
i nawiązywania lub wręcz zerwania z
contextual,
historią.
and certain approaches of
Była tu też mowa o
referring
tym
to
poszukiwaniu pewnego
or turning
ponadczasowego
one's back
znaczenia
to
formy, ale to się
history.
bierze
So
tylko z jedną
it's
z
about
tych
this
szkół myślenia.
timeless nature
Oraz
of form, I
osobno już
think.
króciutko o formie
Then I
kontekstualnej,
have
która jest reprezentuje
a
to
very
właśnie
brief
szkołę myślenia
reflection on the contextual
historyczno-kontekstualnego w formie
form
uniwersalnej
which
i na
presents the
końcu
current way of
wnioski w
thinking
poszukiwaniu świętego
about the
grala w
school, and
architekturze.
finally conclusions
I
on the
najpierw
search for
o samym
holy
mieście, bo dla
grail
mnie
in
tym
architecture.
uniwersum architektonicznym jest miasto, bo mamy
So,
tam prawda,
a
skondensowaną
city is
architekturę i historię.
The universum of architecture because of having this condensed history, but we got used to, we usually speak about history of cities, but I would like to refer to Italo Calvino's book Invisible Cities. So in urban spaces we're confronted with both the linear historic narratives in all residential centers, with successive layers of urban fabric from antiquity to the present. They are superimposed. So it's about creating many histories of cities. So the same applies to time. So now let me refer to another collection of short stories by Calvino. There is this beautiful scene in the first story when men attacked by lions sends out arrows, deadly arrows, and Calvino suspends that story when this arrow is flying, is going towards that lion. So it's about avoiding death and whether that arrow would finally reach the target. So this short story ends before we learn about it. So we have that suspense and the potential histories that could happen. So if that arrow hit the lion, we would say that would be the story of a story of a man. If it missed, that would be the story of a lion. So it's the timeless nature of a concept. So it would be a bit too long, take a bit too long to explain that. But I will be using two concepts. Mircea Eliade, who defines and divides the time into mythical time that existed very early at the start of our civilization, which is a circular time. And Mircea Eliade, he sets out this category of things happening outside the time. It's a time loop of repeatable rituals. So in that context, it is suspended. But then, following the agrarian revolution, and we followed that historical time. So that's the terminology. And then we have another approach and similarity when thinking about the time. So we have the so-called presentism. So there is no past, no future, and our perception of time is related to here and now.
I drugi
So we come
eternalizm,
very
to znaczy,
close
że
to that
traktujemy
mythical
czas
time.
jako
And then
kontinuum
we,
czasowe,
in another
czyli po
approach,
prostu
we
jest to
consider
sekwencja
time
przyczynowo-skutkowa,
continuum,
czyli
which is
przeszłość,
this cause
wpływa
and
na teraźniejszość,
result
teraźniejszość wpływa na przyszłość. I do
sequence.
tego jeszcze
So
dodam coś, co
present
właśnie też za
affects
chwilę
the
będę
future.
w ramach
Then,
omawiania tych szkół,
when
myślenia o formie
discussing
źródła,
these
formie
schools of thinking
architektonicznej,
about the
coś,
form
co
of
się używa jako pewna
source
cecha
architectural
czasu,
forms,
czyli
there is
pewnych
this certain
zdarzeń,
feature
czyli
of time
determinizm i
and
finalizm.
certain events,
W
which is
przypadku oczywiście tego
determinism
ciągu, to znaczy
and
eternalizmu
finalism.
czy
So
czasu
when we have that
historycznego,
continuity
przeważa ten
or historical
deterministyczny, to
time,
znaczy, że
the
raz
determinist
wszystkie przeszłe
approach
wydarzenia
prevails.
wpływają
So
na
once
teraźniejszość i
again,
odwrotnie
the
dalej
past
teraźniejszość będzie wpływać na
events
przyszłość.
affect the
Natomiast
present
finalizm
and the
zakłada, że
present
tak
will
naprawdę
affect the future.
możemy
And
zmienić, to
finalism
znaczy, że
is
nie
about
możemy się wyrwać
our
spod determinizmu.
potential
Jeżeli
or
sobie
option to
wyobrazimy
change.
pewną
We can
przyszłość czy pewien
sever
stan przez nasz
our
oczekiwany
links
i ten
with
stan oczekiwany
determinism.
będziemy
We can
projektować na
achieve
czas
the
teraźniejszy, czyli tak jakby
expected
z
time and
przyszłości
project it
projektujemy na
onto
teraźniejszość i zmieniamy tą
contemporary
teraźniejszość. W tym
time.
sensie
So our
uciekamy od tej
future
determinacji,
is
od tego
projected
właśnie,
on the present and we move
ciągu
away
przyczynowego skutku,
from the
przyczynowo-skutkowego.
determinism
I ten
and the
finalizm,
cause and
on też
effect
częściowo dotyczy tego właśnie w
sequence.
tym części
So that
eternalizmu, natomiast
finalism
jest
also
bardzo o
partially
wiele
refers
silniejszy,
to the
jeżeli chodzi
determinism, but
o
it's
to, co bym nazwała tym prezentyzmem, to
substantially
znaczy prezentyzm nie ma
stronger than in
kontinuum,
presentism. So
natomiast jest takie
presentism
wyobrażenie
does not
kadru
offer
przestrzeni
that
przyszłościowego, do
continuum.
którego możemy wskoczyć.
It
To za chwilę
imagines
będzie miało
the
właśnie w tej wizji
future concept that
futurystycznej
we can
bardzo
join,
duże
that we
znaczenie, jest to
can
bardzo blisko temu myśleniu.
take
I
and
do tego jeszcze, jeżeli chodzi o
use.
determinizm i
Now,
finalizm,
when speaking
dodam
about
jeszcze jednego
determinism
autora,
and
czyli
finalism,
Reinharda
let me
Kosellecka, to jest
add another author, a German historian Reinhard
który
Koselleck
twierdzi, że determinizm i finalizm jest tak
wrote
naprawdę immanentną cechą
that
historii.
determinism and
I z
finalism,
tego
these were
wynikają pewien, że ten
immanent
konflikt
features
między
of
determinizmem a
history,
finalizmem, z
and
tego
that
właśnie rodzą się nowe,
sparkled,
czy
that
alternatywne, czy
conflict,
potencjalne
and
historie
that gave
zderzenia
birth to
tych
potential
dwóch elementów, tych dwóch cech.
clashes
I
of
pierwszą,
these two
i on takie wymienia
elements.
pary i to szybko
So
chcę
he mentions
ilustrować, czyli żeby
pairs
się
and
zdarzyły nowe historie,
as
to muszą się
illustrations.
właśnie
So
zdarzyć,
he
zdarzają się
believes that
dzięki
for
narodzinom i
new
śmierci.
histories to
oczywiste,
occur,
bo
there
tutaj
must
mamy
be births
Dino
and deaths.
Buzzatiego z poematu.
Here we have
Oczywiście
Dino
poemat
Buzzati
jest
from his
o
poem,
micie Orfeusza
and
i
this
Eurydyki,
poem
więc
is
nie do
about
końca dotyczy
Orpheus
tego
and
teraz, ale użyłam tych
Eurydice.
obrazków, bo
So
bardzo ładnie
I've
tutaj tam
used
pasują
this
do
picture,
tej
this as
pary
illustration
śmierci,
because it
że w przypadku miasta mamy
fits
tu
beautifully
z jednej
into
strony
that
stałą
concept of
wymianę
birth and
pokoleń
death,
ludzi,
because
mamy
in
te kondukty
cities we have
żałobne,
that
oczywiście mamy miejsce
continuous
narodziny nowych
exchange of
pokoleń i te
generations.
nowe pokolenia
We have
stwarzają
burials
te
and
ich
births,
historie na nowo
so the
i
new
lub inaczej
generations
będą
create
opowiadane
history
w
and
stosunku do
new
tych, które
and will
pokolenia
tell
odeszły.
new
Ale to
stories
samo
when
dotyczy
compared to
dalej
the
z
stories
książki,
of
z
the
tej
past
samej książki.
generation.
Mamy
But
tutaj dworzec do wieczności,
in
gdzie
the
nie tylko
same
ludzie,
book
prawda,
we have that
umierający odjeżdżają w wieczność, ale też
train
budynki. I to znamy z architektury, że po
going to
prostu istnieje taka
eternity,
kategoria jak
a
śmierć
railway
fizyczna, prawda, że
station that
substancja podlega
is
architektonicznym,
for
czyli
those
też
who are saying
budynki
goodbye to their
rodzą się,
lives. So
umierają,
architecture
dając
also
miejsce nowym.
gives birth
Kolejna
and
para to
dies. So
jest
buildings are
przyjaciel,
born and
przepraszam, ta
die.
kolejna para to
Then
jest
another
przetrwanie i
pair
zabijanie.
is survival
Jak pisze
and
Koselleck, bez
killing. So
unicestwienia nie
according
istnieją
to
późniejsze historie.
Koselleck,
I to dotyczy w przypadku
you need
architektury,
annihilation
na
to
przykład,
generate
takich zdarzeń, prawda, że
stories.
pewne
So without
nieudane,
annihilation,
na przykład
later
eksperymenty, jak
histories
w
cannot
przypadku
exist.
jakichś budynków
So that
wysokościowych
would be
i ze względu albo na
for
brak akceptacji
example,
społecznej, albo na jakieś inne
high-rise
warunki
buildings in
ulegają, prawda,
cities that
destrukcji,
are
czyli
destroyed
temu
because of some
unicestwieniu po to, żeby
external
zrobić miejsce
conditions.
na inne
So
rozwiązania.
they are
Znamy oczywiście,
annihilated
prawda,
to
historię
give
przebudowy
make
Paryża,
room to
Haussmanna,
other
znamy
Revolution. So Paris reconstruction preceded by fire, and 1662 Great Fire of London, followed by rebuilding and reconstruction. So we have these deaths, death by destruction, death by annihilation. So killing is about annihilation to make room for new story, for new potential events. Then Koselleck mentions another category, that is friend and enemy, friend and foe. He calls this conflict the Greeks and barbarians, in the sense that each civilization, each city has an element of invasion in its history. So that element of continuous conflict persists, and I think it would be it would make point here to show a picture of Warsaw in ruins, a very dramatic point in the history of the city. On the one hand, and as Koselleck says, new history starts from there. Then he mentions the tension between internal and external space. So something is happening and changes that cause and effect relationship. So that's the debate about boundaries and mutual influences. No matter how we respect our history, there will be always some influence coming from peripheries, and they bring certain patterns, they bring certain models, and imperia also mark the space. So there are new elements coming, and these elements are not born by our history, but born in foreign civilizations. Then Koselleck mentions the conflict between the strong and the weak. So that was French Revolution, October Revolution, and then arson in Paris. So these walls that we are erecting, the social contexts that are destroyed at some point. But then every time we must ask whether that is going to be a history of humans, like in the case of Calvino's short story, or another story. So we do not resolve that question. We don't know who the winner was. So we have these two schools of determinism and finalism. So the first school, and this is what we teach students, we always start our design courses on analyzing architectural context. So here we have that contextual school of thinking. We need to look at sources of forms on the basis of analyses. Then we have that anti or counter-historic school, and it claims that the world of abstract, the world of idea is the source of forms. That could be the world of ideal forms by Plato, or the neosphere with all ideas circling above us in the air, or the space by Carl Jung. So we have all these abstract references. They bring us some inspirations, they bring us the concepts for construction of forms. So many modernists spoke about turning their backs on history. So it's about not looking for teachers, for professors. And here are juxtaposed two sources. So these two schools have been ironically presented. So these are satires by Peichel,
The first one is a contextual school which demonstrates that history is a teacher. We see some styles, and even if we design some forms, we are the next link in the chain of history. We create history, and those who come after us, they will be also studying and contributing to that role of architecture. Then we have this modernist school. So again, we have this question mark. Shortly, through our meditation, we connect with this abstract world outside any context, because the sources are not in the context. And now, very briefly about that form. So in that school, which is based on history and context, there are again two trends, and let me mention them. So this is why I selected that building which is packed or covered by Cristo, wrapped by Cristo. So we do not focus on details with certain friezes and decorations. So we are not inspired by all the decorative part. There is this school which is looking for a certain system of values in history. So Jacques Le Goff offered that division of breakdown of history of civilization into three periods. So time of church, and time of merchant, and time of clock. And now we're in the phase of clock, and time of church is sometimes referred to as the time of God. So he was teaching that neither space nor time were owned by human. Well, human time was devoted to God, and it was through that an expression of spiritual values. Then in the merchant times, the time and space was then owned by men. So when we speak about the merchant times, we are speaking about certain values that could be used in our everyday life. And then we have the time of clock. That started off in the time of industrialization. It's about introducing standard, the clock time that started from the Industrial Revolution and continues to the present. And in that sense, the fundamental assumptions of the historical and contextualism and a historical modernism trends does not require reinvention of forms. It just claims that the spiritual values in architecture are worth continuing. Well, of course, that could be redefined at present, but it's about appreciating the spiritual values that come from history of architecture. Then we have the values that we can use, and then we have the concept of standards and innovation in architecture. However, postmodernism was mainly the example of that history was used more as a pattern, as a list or set of models for architecture. So postmodernism is gone, it has reached its end, but we may still believe that we have this obligation to continue certain approaches. So for postmodernism has left that literal meaning, which is difficult to defend. But then there was this concept of collage introduced, which was the fragmentation of history. So it was Derrida's concept-based conceptual partitioning of history to create mixes which we would appreciate. So I would refer to that as the Frankenstein-like approach to architecture. We attempted using elements which are long dead, and we try to bring them to life. And then we have this ahistoric school of modernism. As I said, it believes that the sources of form should come from outside any context. And as Chris Albert Schulz calls it, here we are dealing with chronogeometrical order, pure geometry, as he claims. This pure geometry can be put in any context. The form is autonomous in the context, and when it materializes in the context, it obviously creates and starts a relationship with the context, but this is not what we have in the contextual historian school when we are looking for the relationship. Here is it's quite opposite, that form was created in different space and materializes in the context, then it initiates certain relations. So it has a very different source. And here, this trend, which is very strong in that contextual and modernistic school, this is about idealizing the vision. So it's not only the vision of form, but the vision of the future. It should occur now. It should be designed now. So futurist movement is completely acontextual. All the potential visions may be delivered in that movement. Now, I would criticize how the approach and how deep it goes, but it could be as well that the vision may not be as it is expressed. So sometimes we position architects as prophets, and we enforce certain decisions, which is maybe threatening. So I would refer to Joker here. The figure of Joker represents that very individual approach. So these ideas may come from upper layers, but we still believe that the minds of prophets, when reaching to the past, came in abundance. So let me move on to the next and final part, which is about life and death. So in that school of architecture and modernism, so that school of historian and context, there is this accord that certain aspects die and pass. So that's the Holy Grail, but in a contextual modernist approach, the search for ideal form continues. This ideal form is universal enough, so it is classified though this timeless category. And at some point this timeless category will grow old and die. So here we have that vision of that perfect geometry, which is beyond any assessment by history. And here it is amazing or surprising that Ricardo Boffi, who represents postmodernism in two interviews, had very similar intentions to Mies van der Rohe. He believed that as architects we should plunder the history of architecture and dig up that timeless concept and explore it. So the timeless concept in history of architecture, well, Bokella, he considered that classicism. He wanted to find it, he wanted to revive it in 1980s. On the other hand, Mies van der Rohe, again, he represents the timeless, universal, eternal form of abstractions. And during one of his lectures, Jean Nouvel, he said that Mies van der Rohe, he reached the limits of architecture. So these forms, his ideas are the purest expression. So let me add here that this debate continues when it comes to universal time, mythical time, and historic time. So that continues when it comes to introducing certain order in structure. So historic time follows the era of entropia. So all these structures, they gain complexity and become chaotic in their drive towards complete disruption. But then it is believed that that ideal order is to oppose the entropia of systems. So this is why we cannot learn from history, because it follows that era of entropia. We should be looking for the supreme order which opposes the disruption of structures. And this is this additional rationale and reason for sources of ideas. So speaking about the life and death of form, on the one hand, architecture is tangible, material form of art. So to some extent, it is doomed to die. But on the other hand, as modernists, we believe in the world of ideas, of illusion and eternity. So I believe that as Hamlet, we are torn in that conflict that cannot be decided.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much.
Może jednozdaniowy komentarz.
Maybe a single sentence of a comment. This lecture could be linked to the first one here. Van den Rohe reached the Holy Grail, a very broad presentation.
To jedno zdanie. Mnie się nasunęło, że modernizm stał się już historyczny. Już mamy neomodernizm.
Well, modernism belongs with history. We have neo-modernism, other currents, and the next paper will even, after the break, will discuss modernisms. Yes, but now...
Co na to organizatorzy?
Yes, how about organizers?
Dobrze.
No niestety, nie ma... tutaj trzeba pamiętać o
Dear ladies and gentlemen, yes, we need to remember to stick to the time. We still have our speaker, Francesco Saveria from Bologna, Francesco Saveria Ferla, who has an interesting presentation. Architecture between fiction and reality in the times of artificial intelligence. We'd like to welcome Professor to our stage.
Good morning, and thank you for being invited in this important international meeting. I will try to stay on time. In fact, I want to put the timer. Otherwise, yeah, but since I don't see that much, I put this with the ring. So, thank you. So, today, I want to thanks to Professor Kieslowski and to the school, the Polytechnic School of Krakow, and welcome to all the estimated colleagues and friends and students which are here. I would not directly want to talk about the relationship with the history and the architecture because, as you know from the speech that we had yesterday by Professor Rafael Laneri and Professor Bruno Messina and others, and even today the speech of Claudia Battaino, in Italy, we are strongly connected to the history of architecture, so, and we believe that it's a permanent source of the invention for new forms in the reality that we are living, and also in order to prefigurate other possible towns or possible space of the town. So I want to point out your attention to, I think, what will be a problem, at least for the people that is, for the architects that are looking at the history of architecture as a source of inspiration. You know, in Italy that started with Quaroni, that he published a very important book in the 30s, L'architettura delle città, the architecture of the cities, that then became an issue that was studied by others like Saveri Muratori and then Richard Rogers and many others architects that were mentioned even yesterday by the other panelists. So I think that, as St. Augustine used to say, that a person without memory is a dead man, is a dead person. So that's why I think, and memory is part of the history. As a human, we had to reinvent, to know about the history. So, but we are living in a high technology culture, and everybody of us deal with the AI, artificial intelligence, which is a really important tool on all the human activities, from the constructions to the literature to the medical issues and so on, and also on the in the design. Today, I do not want to talk about the design, the use of the AI in designing. That will be another, probably another interesting meeting about that. But I want to point out a problem that I think that we will have about the what will leave to the future generation, thanks to the AI. We knew that even the Renaissance, the architects used to study the history, but architects, they were moving from their own country to Rome or to Greece or to Turkey in order to study the ancient architecture. They were working on the physicity of the material. On the other hand, they were learning architecture by the books, by the documents that they got from the past. With AI, what we will leave? We knew that it's an instrument in which we can design, we can create fake documents. A recent survey in Italy tells that 75% of our teenagers, they believe in fake news because they don't have probably the tools, the intellectual tools, the knowledge in order to understand what is true from what is fake. And so this create a narrative, a fake narrative of the past. And since, as a teacher, I think we always we saw the Alvar Aalto, the connection of Aalto with the history, how important was but this is just one of the last examples. We can make a thousand of it as a source of inspiration for the new forms. If we want to do something that will be readable by everybody, not just something that belongs to our egos. And I appreciate the last speech that just showed the skyline of the egos, that I think is a wonderful imagine of what we are living today in our towns. Some of our towns, unfortunately not Krakow, which is a beautiful town, are a sort of Babylon place, a place where no one's understood the other one. So the creation of fake element, I think, does the risk of creating a distortion of the past in order to inventing a different future. We know that there is a problem of conservation of the historical documents. Our libraries, they are going to throw away the books after they digitalize that. So what will be the source that we will use? The historians are heavily concerned in thinking, in preserving the documents, even what they were the analogical documents that now are digitalized. So they were preserved in digital archives. And first of all, there is the possibility of manipulating those archives or transforming the original document into or creating a fake document. So and this, thanks to the artificial intelligence, probably also can create new fake original documents. We already know today how many fake pictures there are on the net, like fake US soldiers during the Vietnam Wars, but many others are going around the internet, realizing a new narrative of the past. The picture that are the slideshow that is moving on, and while I'm talking, are some fakes construction that I did, but you know those are quite rough, but made with the AI, except the first two that they were made in the old style with a collage. In design, a sort of an analogous town, like the famous painting by Canaletto, in which he depicts the Palladius Bridge on Rialto and other projects of him. He's designing a analogical Venice in different Venice, and that had a great influence in the town design. So, but that was a real document. I mean, I have not an answer about the problem that we will have to deal with the AI use of the prefiguration of the future. But I think we should reflect on this problem in order to find a way as in how to transmit an idea of the architecture by using real materials and not just making a confusion on the future. So, and on the other hand, I don't want to, how do you say, to point my finger against the AI, because I think that this is a terrific instrument, and thanks that we have it. But I want to just be reflect on the problem that probably we will have in teaching the architecture to our students. I'm a professor at the University of Bologna, so I'm thinking about that because we are seeing the young generation, how they're using the AI, sometimes without having the skills in order to find out what is a consistencies idea, or it's just a superficial vision created by the artificial intelligence. I'm waiting that some student will come to me showing something that will never exist as a demonstration of his ideas, of his probably foolish idea. I hope that that will not never happen, but then I asking myself, will I be able to understand what will be the fake or not? So I leave you with this thought that I tried to explain in the few minutes that I had in my possibility, and I want to thank you for the attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation about AI. It is not first presentation about this subject. So, because we are 20 minutes late, we will start the break. Momencik, po polsku tutaj z organizatorami ustaliliśmy, że ta przerwa będzie krótsza, 10-minutowa, także za 10 minut się spotkamy, ponieważ jesteśmy zobligowani obiadem. Jak się spóźnimy na obiad z prezentacjami, to nie zjemy nic przed dalszą podróżą, także zapraszam za 10 minut.
So please be back in 10 minutes. No, let me make an
tylko bardzo
announcement.
przepraszam, bo miasto Kraków prosiło nas, żeby zrobić badanie turystów i żeby Państwo się nie dziwili, że dostaną takie karteczki, ile Państwo zjedli, znaczy oczywiście nie u nas, tylko na mieście i za ile.
Be surprised. You will be asked by our nice researcher about the restaurants you may have visited and so on. Please don't be surprised or offended. It's a research carried out by our city. Thank you.
Już proszę Państwa, 10 minut. Można na salę przynieść herbatkę i kawkę. Czyli 11:40.
Okay, so we will reconvene at 11:41.
No i widać, jak ludzie bezradnie tak te domy stawiają tam i siam. Burdel, proszę pana, jest nieprawdopodobny, więc mój profesor z architektury byłby zrozpaczony, jakby krajobraz zobaczył. Projektowanie krajobrazu, profesor Żywon. Trzeba latać. Ile się da, trzeba latać. Skąd się to wszystko wzięło? Moja obecność. Nie tą ścieżką, ale tą tutaj z prawej strony podążałem na Wydział Architektury, gdzie uprzednio 2 miesiące wcześniej zdałem egzamin na studenta pierwszego roku. O architekturze wiedziałem, ale bardzo niewiele. Architektura to dla mnie przede wszystkim rysunek, ale potem okazało się, że rysunek to jest jedną z niewielu części, bo architektura to jest świat. Rysunek był moją ulubioną formą spełniania oczekiwań profesorów. No i tak minęły lata. 6 lat tutaj, ale może też 7. Wydział Architektury to jest czyste wzruszenie. Z tych studiów w zasadzie wszystko się wzięło potem w wieku moim dojrzałym. To, co nas kręciło, to te możliwości, które niektórzy profesorowie stwarzali. Nie chciałbym tego nazywać jakąś daleko posuniętą swobodą, ale coś w tym było. Inicjowanie młodych, rozgrzewanie młodych umysłów, nieuporządkowanych, ale rozgrzewanie dla porządkowania świata. Bo architektura to jest porządkowanie świata. Z drugiej strony uczenie tego, co jest podstawą, a więc historii architektury. Studentów architektury, ja się do nich zaliczam też. Wielu studentów architektury zmieniało potem swoje zainteresowania, które blisko były architektury. A więc filmowcy, a więc pan Majewski, a więc pan Mrożek, który poszedł w film, ale w zasadzie w literaturę. W moim wypadku to się przemiksowało w stronę muzyki, która mi towarzyszyła równolegle. Jeden z profesorów zgodził się, żeby obrona pracy semestralnej przebiegała z Stowarzyszeniem Muzyki. Pierwszym profesorem, który zrobił wrażenie, profesor Tomasz Mańkowski. Bardzo dobry architekt. Postać, bo to była postać, ale też osobowość, niezwykła osobowość profesor Wróblewskiej. Więc to mamy do czynienia Wydział Rysunku. Zapamiętałem profesora Włodzimierza Gruszyńskiego. Niesłychanie pojemny umysł. Profesor Włodzimierz Gruszczyński to była postać absolutnie zjawiskowa na Wydziale Architektury. Dlaczego? Futurysta. Jeśli państwo coś mówi futurysta i futuryzm, no to było wszystko skupione w tej niezwykłej umysłowości profesora Gruszczyńskiego. Miałem przyjemność złożyć u profesora semestralną pracę, której treścią był dom posadowiony nad rzeką, strumieniem o szerokości chyba 20 metrów. Ja myślę, że jakby ten dom został zaprojektowany i ja bym tam zamieszkał, to niedługo by trzeba było czekać, abym oszalał. Oszalałbym z tego dźwięku przecież tego strumienia nieustającego i tak dalej, i tak dalej. Naturalnie pojawili się inni profesorowie, profesor Żychoń od projektowania zieleni, profesor Śmiałowski, bardzo ważny, na pierwszym roku, który porządkował nasze rozkołysane, rozgrzane umysły. Mamy tu profesora Zina, to są jego projekty. Historię architektury polskiej przekazywał w takiej estetyce, jeśli mogę tak powiedzieć, zupełnie niekonwencjonalnej. To była opowieść pełna wzruszenia na współczesne piękno zabytków architektonicznych. Towarzyszył mi jazz. Jazz, który słuchaliśmy wraz z przyjacielem po kilka godzin dziennie. Byłem pianistą jazzowym. Do dzisiejszego dnia mogę powiedzieć, że jestem pianistą jazzowym. Pojawia się muzyka i potem ta architektura odchodzi, a pojawia się Anawa i z tą Anawą wyjeżdżamy w Polskę, wyjeżdżamy za granicę, wyjeżdżamy do Monachium, wyjeżdżamy na olimpiadę. Architektura też jest takim rodzajem, takim miejscem wolności wyobraźni, wolności projektowania, które nigdy później nie może się spełnić. No szczęśliwie mnie się udawało, żeby nie traktować tego świata, nie zważać na opresyjność tego świata. Ale jeśli pan pyta, czy architektura to wolność, odpowiadam tak. Jeśli szybowce to jest wolność, to odpowiadam nie tylko wolność, szaleństwo. A przecież bez szaleństwa nie ma wzruszenia prawdziwego. Szaleństwo kontrolowane, ale jednak szaleństwo.
Że ważne są tylko te dni, których jeszcze nie znamy. Ważnych jest kilka tych chwil, tych, na które czekamy. Ważne są tylko te dni, których jeszcze nie znamy. Ważnych jest kilka tych chwil, tych, na które czekamy. Ważne są tylko te dni, których jeszcze nie znamy. Ważnych jest kilka tych chwil, tych, na które czekamy.
Wziąłem temat pracy dyplomowej, renowacja, projekt renowacji i adaptacji XVII-wiecznej karczmy na szlaku węgierskim. Doktor Frazik zgodził się. Oczywiście to było w katedrze profesora Zina. Stało się coś niekorzystnego, ale fenomenalnie, jak się potem okazało, przyjaznego dla mnie. Śnieg spadł ciężki, karczma się zawaliła, XVII-wieczna na szlaku węgierskim. Bo ja wtedy jakby otrzymałem dar od losu. Rozumiałem, że praca dyplomowa jest pewnym skrępowaniem mnie, ukierunkowaniem wspaniałym, niezwykłym ukierunkowaniem architektonicznym, ale jednak mnie to krępowało. No i tak właśnie, tak.
Ważne są tylko te dni, których jeszcze nie znamy.
No i widać, jak ludzie bezradnie tam te domy stawiają, tam i siam. Burdel, proszę pana, jest nieprawdopodobny, więc...
Zaczynamy, proszę Państwa, po przerwie.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome after the break. Nasza kolejna prezentacja to będzie prezentacja
from Bologna and the topic architectural transfiguration of
będzie mówił o pan Amistadi, będziemy o architektonicznej transfiguracji historii.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
Bardzo dziękuję Państwu za zaproszenie.
I will speak about this concept of transfiguration of the history, showing one project made together with Luciano Semerani almost 20 years ago. Luciano Semerani was a great professor in the UAB University. What does it mean, transfiguration? Transfiguration means to transform something in something else, and especially to transform something, in this case, sad and tragic, in something happy or better. This is the transfiguration. Maybe you know the poem by William Shakespeare, The Tempest, when the body of the dead father fell down in the deep of the oceans, was transfigurated into something rich and strange. The bones became corals, and the eyes became pearls. This is the transfiguration. In this case, the transfiguration is the transfiguration of the history, of the tragic history of the First Great War in the north of Italy. The first step of this transfiguration of the history is the figurativization. Yeah, figurativization is one concept taken in the narratology, in the discursive level, used, for example, in the fairy tale, yeah, when you have to express one abstract meaning into something concrete. For example, in the fairy tale, the lion is always brave. If you have to express the smart, you use the figure of the fox. This is the figurativization. The landscape, the territory that we try to do this transfiguration is this valley in the north of Italy. One valley with plenty of signs of the war, because this was one territory on the boundary between Italy and Kaisertum, the Österreich Kaisertum. Yeah. So there is plenty of signs. The signs are gallery, forts, bunkers, trenches, trenches, a lot of scars in the soil. But all these signs are spread and sprawled without a system. So the figurativization is the idea to put in this chaos one narrative system. Yeah? Yeah. But what is the problem? The problem is that this is a landscape without building. It is one open territory. And the problem is to recognize something in this territory, in this fragmented landscape. To recognize something in something is one operation that reminds us to, for example, the speculative invention by Leonardo da Vinci. Maybe you know this invention by Leonardo da Vinci that say that if you find one spot, one blur in the wall, you can recognize something, yeah? For example, you can recognize one animal. It is the same when we recognize ships in the cloud or something like this, yeah? Because, of course, it is different to recognize one urban blocks on quarters in the city. But in an open landscape, it is more difficult. So you have to find out one external reference. So the figures are one external reference. I do the example. For example, this is the territory with a lot of signs. This work. This is a fort. One of the help that can help us in the figurativization, for example, is the toponomastic, the name of the things. For example, we discovered that the name of this hill is the hill of the horse, yeah? And the name of this fort is Fort of the Horn. And so, for example, we can recognize, like the kids, in these figures, we can recognize one back of the horse here. We can recognize the leg, yeah? And so this, without meaning, landscape became this narrative system where the heel of the horse became the figure of the horse, and where, for example, this fort, what the name is, the Fort of the Horn, became the skull of the bull. Yeah? So this is the narrative system that we call the places, yeah? And figures. This is the figurativization. So the figure in this semiotic, for example, is very famous, very important, Algirdas Gremas. Algirdas Gremas was one pupil of de Saussure. Yeah? This is post-structuralist semiotic, where between the deep level of the deep structure of the type and the shape, there is this middle level. This is the level of the figure. Yeah? This is the fragment, the sign of the fort, yeah, before the restoration and after the restoration. This is not Italian, yeah. This is the fort of the Österreich Kaisertum, because I am born here. I am not so completely Italian. In any case, this is the shape after the restoration. And we can recognize the head of the bull, the skull of the bull. And so Luciano Semerani invented this transfiguration where this symbol of the fort became one sculpture. This is interesting sketches by him, yeah? Because it is all the transfiguration, starting from the first shape, do this intentional shape until this cubist and sculpture. And we put the sculpture with the one helicopter on high, 50-meter high hill. It was funny because the helicopter was one animal, because it was one super puma, one puma. Yeah. The second operation of this transfiguration is the transfiguration had another concept inside, very important, the estrangement. Because, of course, if you transform something in something else, you go out from the familiar things into something a bit strange. What is this concept of estrangement? Estrangement means that you have to, when you get used in something, that thing misvalue, lose value, and you renew it, transfigurating it. For example, this is one famous cases, because imagine this is maybe one of the most powerful example of estrangement, because Mauro Condusi was the first one that in Venice introduced one white facade, because before him there was all the city was dark and made by brick. Yeah, Mauro Condusi came from the mountain, yeah, from Bergamo, and introduced this idea of this strange white facade in one dark by brick Venice. I did the same in my smaller occasion, in smaller context, but I did the same because inside the trench of the First War, of course, the trench was the place of the burners to get bored, to get sad. Yeah? I introduced this white stone in one wood made by dark and brown trees. And so, of course, I transfigurated the trench into one garden, one stone garden. Here it is not missing because the manager of the municipality asked me why I missed some stones. I didn't forgot, but it was the place for the blueberry, my idea. So yeah, this estrangement Bertolt Brecht used, for example, in the theater with Verfremdungseffect. Estrangement is one concept invented by a great expert of literature in Russia, was Viktor Shklovsky. Yeah? Viktor Shklovsky invented the concept in the 1917. To make the familiar seem strange or new, forcing the reader to perceive reality in a new way. So the trench became a garden. This is a very interesting book. This is by Viktor Shklovsky, Art as Device. Estrangement is one of these devices. And then we studied all the fort, the fort of the Horn, with this sequence of narrative sequence of rooms. In every of these rooms, we transfigurated the previous story in something new, thinking, for example, to the kids, not necessarily good kids, maybe bad kids, but in any case for the kids. For example, the place where was in the original function, the carrier pigeons became doves of peace. Yeah? And this is the sketches by Luciano Semerani of the doves. This is a bit, this is normal transfiguration. This is more going to Braque, to the cubist expression. Or for example, another interesting transfiguration was the transfiguration of the soldiers to uniforms, yeah? Because another important thing is that, you know, the first great war was one war when the soldiers was considered numbers, yeah? Was considered as not human being. And for example, a lot of work of art in that period reflected about this dehumanization of the soldiers. So we put in the place of the troops, in the dormitory, we imagined to put, because we didn't realize this, just the uniform of the soldiers. For example, one of the most strong reflection about this concept was made by Duchamp in the 9 Meilais molds, yeah, where the people was considered molds, stamp. Yeah? Or for example, another topic of the First Great War was the loneliness of the soldiers that always had with the picture of the girlfriend. Yeah. Another transfiguration is to mortar to telescope. So that is the exact calculation of the scientists to produce that. Yeah. We transfigure into exact calculation to see the astronomy, to see the stars. Yeah. So the calculation, this is one picture, original picture inside the fort. This is the original object, tool for the depth, and we transform it in one telescope. At the same way, we transform the normal trees in photovoltaic trees to produce energy. Another famous, one of the most famous example of transfiguration was made by Friedrich Schinkel, you know, where he transformed the stars world into one exact arrangement of geometrical stars. Yeah, we projected to do the same in the vault, on the iron vault of this artillery room here. For example, in the fort, several rooms was occupied by the gunpowder, yeah, by the gunpowder. So we imagine to substitute the gunpowder in colored powder where the kid can play with the powder. Yeah? So this is transfiguration, is gunpowder, colored powder. In this fort, there is, of course, the mortuary. Yeah, this is the mortuary. But we imagine that the place, the final destination of the soldiers, became the place where the uniform of the soldiers was printed, was stamped. So the mortuary became, in this transfiguration, one mold, one matrix of the soldier that the war sent to die by the institutions. So it is the recovery of Fort Corner is a poetic, didactic, and museographic reaction machine. Is based on the identification and characterization of a series of stations which scenographically evoke the action for which these sites were intended within the military machine, transferring the themes to the symbolic plane through analogies and metaphors of the objective and practical dimension of the original use. The history of the specific interconnection present in local force between the engineering of world wars, construction, technology, and the evolution of military tactics and strategies, and the other become poetically transfigurated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really very interesting philosophical approach to architecture and transfiguration of history connected with architecture. And now, teraz proszę pana profesora Mateusza Górkowicza,
and now let me invite
oraz
our team, Professor Górkowicz, Kinga Racon-Leja, Filip Suchoń from Krakow.
Przedstawienie referatu Hidden
Our speakers will talk about the hidden legacy of modernisms.
Odwołuje się do
And
talentów
at this point,
retorycznych.
let me make an appeal to your rhetorical skills. We need to stick to our agenda. Our lunch time is fixed. And after the lunch, we will have yet another ceremony. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. We would like to thank the organizers for this invitation. We are honored to speak, and we will speak briefly. Ladies and gentlemen, city is the natural environment of human beings. According to estimates in June, and by the end of this year, 76% actually of residents of Europe will live in cities and urban agglomerations, despite the shrinkage of cities. European cities differ from each other, but they do share many common features. The individualism is expressed in beautiful squares, buildings, designed purposefully to fit a specific space or referring to the unique history. But the simple background architecture, the block architecture filled with smaller, larger details is what constitutes the
europejskich
collarbone,
miast.
the spinal,
odrzucili w latach
the spine
20.
of the
zabudowę
cities.
kwartałową, odrzucili
In the
kwartał
20s,
jako coś
modernists
niezdrowego, coś
rejected
burżuazyjnego,
a block
coś,
as something that was
co nie
unhealthy,
powinno się więcej zdarzyć.
that's something that should be forgotten.
W tej zabudowie kwartałowej
Nevertheless,
śródmieskiej, historycznej możemy
this
obserwować bardzo
city
wiele
center
form
development
nawiązujących
based on
mniej lub bardziej
blocks
pośrednio do architektury modernistycznej. I to form, które powstały
a lot of
przez
references
ponad już
to modernism.
110-115 lat
So these are the buildings that have been created over 110
związanych
years.
z Siamem architektów.
Pozwolę sobie przedstawić dwa budynki,
Now let me
które reprezentują
speak
dwa
about two
sposoby definiowania
buildings.
przestrzeni.
Two buildings that
To
represent
będzie
two different
Casa
ways of
Lopez,
defining
w
space.
Barcelonie,
Casa
który
Lopez
reprezentuje
in
modernizm
Barcelona
elitarny.
that represent
Technologia służyła
elitist
tam komfortowi.
modernism. So
oraz
the use
Cité
of
de
technology
Refuge,
to
który
provide
tutaj,
comfort.
już widzimy na
And
zdjęciu
Cité de
satelitarnym
Refuge
Paryża,
in
czyli
Paris.
modernizm społeczny, gdzie
So social
technologia
modernism,
miała służyć
where
masom.
technology was to
Obie te
be
realizacje
of
dowodzą,
service to
że
the masses.
definiowanie przestrzeni
And both
architektonicznej
investments
to nie
prove
tylko
that
forma,
defining
ale także
architectural
funkcja łącznie z
space
technologią
is not
w
only
służbie
about
społeczeństwa.
form, but about form and technology employed
Cité de Refuge,
for the
czyli
benefit
architektura
of
społeczna z 1933
citizens.
roku,
Cité de Refuge
to
is a
pierwszy
social
znaczący
architecture
duży
of
budynek Le Corbusiera w
1933,
stolicy Francji.
and it is the first big
Zaprojektowany
building
dla
by
Armii
Le Corbusier
Zbawienia
in
jako
France. It
schronienie
was
dla
designed for the
500 osób
Salvation Army
potrzebujących.
as a shelter for
Inauguracja
people who
odbyła się z udziałem
needed
prezydenta
some
Republiki
housing.
Lebruna.
And it was
To jest
opened
manifest,
by
który
Lebrun,
łączy awangardę
the president of
architektoniczną
France. And it
z
combines
ideologią
architectural
społeczną,
avant-garde
ponieważ
with social
była to przestrzeń dla ludzi
ideology.
wykluczonych.
It was space for the excluded.
Szkielet słupowo-płytowy, żelbet,
So
a
it was
na
made
nim
of
1000 metrów
reinforced
kwadratowych
concrete
ściany
and
kurtynowej.
thousands of
Pierwsze takie
square
zastosowanie
meters of
klimatyzacji w budynku
curtain
mieszkalnym.
wall, the first
No niestety
application of
wizja
this
tej
technology
dokładnej
to a
respiracji,
residential
tego
building.
przewietrzania
Well,
skutecznego okazała się przedwczesna.
in the
System
end,
zawiódł i w latach 50.
this
fasady
ventilation
wymieniono.
system failed,
Widzimy
and
tutaj, że
then the
technologia,
facade
która
was
służyła
replaced. So we
była
can see that
narzędziem
the
definiowania
technology that
przestrzeni,
was used to
odnosiła
define this
zarówno
space
sukcesy, jak i porażki.
in some cases was successful,
Od
but in
1975
others
roku
failed.
Cité de Refuge
From
jest
the
zabytkiem.
1950s, Cité de Refuge
Budynek
is
przeszedł
considered
gruntowną
a
restaurację,
monument. It
renowację
has
w
been
latach
restored in
2011-16, a nadal służy Armii Zbawienia. Ciągłość
2011-2016,
funkcji
and it
jest
is
tutaj
still
zachowana
being
przez
used by the
90
Salvation
lat.
Army for 90
Oprowadzanie
years.
po
Its
budynku
purpose
jest możliwe
hasn't
tam
changed.
zwiedzanie.
You can
Przeprowadzają
visit the
sami
building,
mieszkańcy,
and the
odpowiednią
residents
przeszkolenie.
themselves
Budynek służy
who
też
have been
często jako
trained serve as
scenografia filmowa.
guides,
To jest
and the
taki żywy
building is
testament
often
Le
used
Corbusiera.
as a
Przestrzeń
film set.
zdefiniowana dla
So
społeczeństwa
it was a
nadal
space
trwa i
defined for
ewoluuje.
the society. It continues to
A
live
tutaj
and
przenosimy się
evolve.
do
Let us
Barcelony
now
i do dzieła
move to
Josepa
Barcelona,
Lopeza,
and this is the work by
Josepa
Lopez.
Serta i Lopeza i Casa Lopez.
This is Casa Lopez,
Z
and your face
1931 roku ten budynek
is
wprowadza
Lopez. It
rewolucyjną
was
typologię
created in
mieszkaniową.
1931.
Mieści 6 mieszkań
It
dwupoziomowych
consists
na
of
narożnej działce
6
i to
two-story
nowatorskie rozwiązanie,
buildings on a
które
narrow
pozwoliło
plot,
zredukować
and it was an
powierzchnię
innovative
komunikacji o
solution
blisko
that
30%.
enabled him to reduce the space of communication
Jest to
by
maszyna do mieszkania,
30%.
no bo Sert
It is a
wdraża tutaj
living
purystyczny
machine, or
korbuzjerowski
machine
język
for
w
living,
pełnym zakresie,
and the full
a budynek
implementation of
funkcjonuje
the
jak
Corbusier's
precyzyjna maszyna.
language. So this building
Sypy
functions
na
as a
śmieci,
precise
windy
machine.
osobowe, windy
You have
towarowe, nawet
trash
takie specjalne
shafts,
podnośniki łączące kuchnię
lifts,
z jadalniami.
special
Te wszystkie rozwiązania techniczne nie są
lift
dodatkiem,
shafts
tylko są
transporting
istotą, która
food
definiowała
from kitchens
nowoczesną
to
przestrzeń
dining
mieszkalną.
rooms, and all of these inventions were to define
Elewacja
a modern living space.
przedstawia
Let us
ekspresyjny
now move on
układ
to the facade,
dwupoziomowy przez alternację okien,
which
tarasów i
alternates
balkonów.
windows, terraces and balconies.
Konstrukcja szkieletowa w narożnym przęśle, a
We
w dalszych
have
krzesłach
here
ściany nośne i paleta
skeletal
kolorów, taka
structure and
zbliżona do
then bearing walls,
bauhausowskiej.
and
Lekka
a
szarość,
color palette
bladozielony
which reminds us of
tynk,
Bauhaus.
białe elementy stalowe.
We have
Forma
white
wynika
steel
tutaj
elements,
z
light
funkcji
green,
i z
and the
konstrukcji.
form is the result
of function
Mówimy o
and structure.
architekturze tła.
We are
Tymczasem, kiedy ten modernizm się
talking
rodził, tego
about
tła
background architecture,
Krakowie
but
jeszcze
when modernism was
w
born,
zasadzie nie było.
there was no
Kraków,
background in
do
Kraków.
początku XX
Until the
wieku był
beginning of the 20th
twierdzą,
century,
linią
Kraków
graniczną
was
była kolej
the
średnicowa, która
frontier
spowodowała, i to
city.
jest
There was
pewna
a
taka
railway,
niezamierzona zasługa cesarza Franciszka
and
Józefa
it is the
dogęszczenia Krakowa w ramach
unintended
tego historycznego celu.
effect of
Gęste
some
centrum, 100 000
decisions
mieszkańców i
made
Kraków ma
by
wielkie aspiracje, które
Austro-Hungarians
zaczną się jeszcze przed
that
I wojną światową z
increased the
planem Wielkiego
density
Krakowa,
of
z tym
the town
wykroczeniem
itself. So
poza granicę i likwidacja
there were
kolei średnicowej, zmiana mostu kolejowego na most
100,000
Dębnicki,
residents in
otworzy
the
nam
city,
nową
and then
przestrzeń, którą jest aleja.
because
Ona
of
w
the
zasadzie w tych swoich początkach
extension
miała być bulwarem wolności.
and changes to the railway system, we constructed new bridges, and once Poland regained its independence, new avenues were constructed that initially
się różnego rodzaju
were to be named after the Independence Day. So what was constructed along these avenues? Initially these were townhouses. What a townhouse is a typical structure of residential areas in European cities.
Te nasze eksperymenty
So we've been experimenting with that.
spóźnionym Art Deco, tu mamy
You can see some belated Art Deco, Nowakowski and his unique style. So you can see that the Krakow city center is gaining new buildings. These buildings are still with us. They are oftentimes monuments, but
istotne dla polskiej kultury, dla polskiej edukacji.
They are now
I biblioteka
in the neighborhood
of
new structures such as the buildings of the Krakow University of Science and Technology, the Jagiellonian University Library, and here we have an important house which was rented out to university professors. So there are many different interesting buildings, but we have selected two of them. One was by Krzysztof Bień from the 1950s, the period when we abandoned social realism, the first breath of fresh air, freedom, and a number of significant tools, a gate that also
rozmieszczone balkony
gains color. In this case we have the symmetrical arrangement of balconies and the use of color that fills in the empty spaces. I find this example particularly interesting, and the fact that we have also a terrace on the top, so the first sign of a new way of thinking. So
myślę, że jeden z ważniejszych budynków.
This is one of the most important buildings in Krakow. Holzer's House, the most modernist building in this area, and next to it a building by Antoni Mazur. You can see here flourishing modernism, lodges that are not typical of townhouses. The building is facing south, and we have these concrete slabs that protect residents from excessive light, and we have a terrace on the top. And this corner is particularly interesting because it has this special arrangement of
Powojenny modernizm oczywiście rozkwitał nie tylko w Krakowie, ale w całej Europie. I to nie tylko na
So modernism was flourishing all over Europe.
o których kiedy indziej,
Not only in residential complexes, but also when it comes to individual buildings inserted among historic objects. So here we have a brutalist church and Dominican monastery, but it is blended into the masses of the houses next to it, so it sort of disappears in the line of the street. If you don't know it is there when you get out of the metro station, you may not notice it, and only after a while do you notice these heavy concrete forms that let light into the building
jego odbiór wewnątrz jako
improve the impression that you have
regulowane
inside.
blendy zasłaniają
These elements partially hide the facade. These are movable. I believe that priests also rent some living spaces there, and there was a car garage at the basement level, if I remember correctly. Now, let us go back to Barcelona. We can see that in 2021, in the 21st century, despite the fact that this urban tissue has already been there for 160 years, there are new objects that have hybrid function, hybrid structure, and represent what Professor was speaking about a while ago. So here we have a kindergarten, a primary school, but the building itself
budynek galeriowy, rzecz wymyślona przez modernistów, dwupoziomowa galeria z niewielkimi mieszkaniami dla nauczycieli,
small flats for teachers, for clerks, for people who can afford these properties. Well, it is the strict city center, an internal entrance, and yet another interesting corner, completely ahistorical, modern. It lets users in this case, children who access the school and kindergarten using this entrance, because yet another one is for the use of residents, and here the use of roofs as the extension of public space. The playground for the school and the kindergarten. And let us once again search for the simplicity of the form in this modernist facade, free from any details. And finally, Professor, over to you. So to conclude, modernist urbanism, criticized in the context of residential complexes, produced many significant works inserted in urban tissue. These buildings gain recognition, they are more and more appreciated. There are many residential buildings referred to as the background architecture, designed by regular architects and the stars in this profession. Avant-garde modernism construed as the expression of a specific thought are no longer here, but modernism still continues to surround us. Over the last 70 years, the buildings that have been erected have become canonical, and yet they are still considered avant-garde. They still comply with this universal rule of beauty, the beauty of urban space.
Dziękujemy bardzo.
Thank you very much.
Chciałbym króciutko może jakąś refleksją się podzielić z autorami i z szanowną publicznością.
Very brief reflection.
Przed przerwą po referacie
So before the break, but after the before the break, but after Professor Kwiatkowska's paper, I said that history was history and modernisms were different. I mean, there was several different types of modernism. And now we heard that it's still avant-garde. Well, my impression is very different. That's the trend, the deterministic trend that you, Professor, mentioned, the contextual, etc. That's in the architecture. It's details. Perhaps it's more modest, but still you can notice that. So, in other words, it's modernism forever. So let us move on to the next paper. We'll have from the airport to the campus, spatial transformation of Kraków University of Technology area in Czyżyny by Matylda Wdowiarz-Bilska, professor.
Szanowni Państwo, dzień dobry.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My presentation is to present changes in the area of the campus of this University of Technology in the area of Czyżyny. The transformation that occurred from closing down the airport in that area that had been in that area from the onset of the 20th century until quite recently.
Ilustracje, zestawienie ilustracji pokazujące w zasadzie 55 lat przekształceń tego terenu
speak about 55 years of transformation of
jeśli chodzi o drogi kołowania,
in terms of taxing,
this konserwatorską.
layout of the airport that is gone, and then
poprzez układ komunikacyjny, ale w dużej mierze poprzez zawłaszczenia na terenie parkingów czy ogródków, to w tej części już można powiedzieć poza kampusowej, której nie będę tutaj omawiać.
Of that former airport. The space that resulted from these actions is limited. So that's the area of the campus.
To jest jakby ta część jest
so that's
oddzielona
the part, and it's separated by a system of transportation lines or junctions, very heavily trafficked. And there's a cultural park with some preserved parts of roads and the Museum of Aviation of Kraków.
Wspominam o projektantach, albowiem jednym z dodatkowych celi mojej
I remember who designed the Museum of Aviation, because my presentation is also aimed at identifying these ideas and concepts prepared by people from the Technical University for that campus. So we have that internal and external integration of the space, but this space is quite varied, and that is based on the strategic plans of the city, and it's based on the investment activity of this university. So there were quite many concepts coming from the members of the academia. And then it largely depended on the capacity of the university or other entities and units to deliver on these projects. So let us look at the strategic city. projects and plans. So we have this general plan dating back to 1958. This is the biggest portion which shows the location of the airport between the old town of Kraków and the district of Nowa Huta. On this plan, well, that airport remained on the plan, but there is a remote vision of a transportation system which somehow assumes that it will be liquidated. In 1973, that airport was closed down, and that was reflected in this general plan of 1968 under the direction of Christian Seibert. So there, the main transportation junction was planned for that area of Czyżyny. A strip of greenery near that junction, general greenery, should be isolating the old town from the city of Nowa Huta, with very important function of airing the city with some residential areas, service areas and industry planned. 1 year later, that area was handed over to this Technical University of Kraków for the future campus. So that was 1978. Here we have this general plan for Kraków urban system. That plan was made by Christian Seibert. And that plan designates that area to the strategic function of this university, and this function was an increasing importance, had an increasing importance in the plans of this university. So, Professor Witold Cęckiewicz prepared a concept which I'm about to show. A transportation junction north-south was supposed to be added there, but it has never been completed, and it was also important to have that taxiing and takeoff part of the airport just for the future, and that was a novelty when compared to the previous plan. Then we have another spatial development plan dating back to 1978, and that continued with that science dedicated function of that area. So in the local master plan or zoning plan of the city,
tak samo jak projekt z 1988 roku pod kierunkiem profesora Zygmunta Ziobrowskiego,
that Professor Ziobrowski was overseeing because of the political system transformation, was planning and adding a big range of public services. With that, a technological park could be located in that area. It played a strategic function for the city. Other functions were also allowed in that area.
Kolejna plansza to studium uwarunkowań zagospodarowania przestrzennego miasta Krakowa opracowanego przez
study preparing the zoning plan and setting out the directions for development of the city. And here the area of Czyżyny-Dąbie was one of the strategic areas for development of the city with the scientific and academia function. For this reason, that area was given as the priority for delivering the zoning plan. So that was the campus, the technological park, and the conference and congress center. Both in 1994 and subsequently, the plan included a tram line going across the campus, supporting the vehicle transportation in that area. So an underground tram was planned.
Pod terenami kampusu oraz w ciągu ulicy
going under the campus and in the adjacent street. Then there was this zoning plan, local zoning planning adopted in 1990, later on cancelled, but that plan introduced a functional division of this area. So in the west there was this technological park practically covering the entire area of that part, and then there was this academic residential area with student dorms and congress and exhibition center for the Kraków University of Technology, a strategic decision for the city of Kraków. In 1994 came another study for the future directions for development of the city, and that was it. That was the end of the strategic importance of the campus in the structure of the city. No plans for the tram, no strategic importance. So we have that technological park as a very important element of knowledge-based economy, but it's not reflected in the plan. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me just move on to what the Faculty of Architecture of this university prepared. So, these are plans that laid the grounds for today's structure. Before that area was transferred to this university, a team headed by Professor Cęckiewicz developed the concept for expanding the campus in the south, areas for scientific venues and buildings were designated, and in the north there were some sports facilities and buildings. So the main composition axis was connected in the academic part with the part of the students' quarters, and that was reinforced with some additional several-story buildings, and externally, well, in the external part there was a 1-2 level development with buildings and structures. So that concept was again designed by Professor Cęckiewicz. So we have this part, as you can see, and initially these buildings, so we could say that in the south that development was created, well, that was modernistic set of buildings. It formed a specific gate to the campus, to the area of the Technical University. So it was that passage between Kraków and the Nowa Huta part of the whole agglomeration. So recently that structure was degraded by creation of a 12-story podium park. So that complex has completely taken over the dominating function. So in the campus or near the campus, we have development of office buildings which are not related to the technical university, and thus some labs of our university. Well, in 1970s, these areas were developed step by step. Campus was developed from the south. Then the student quarters were developed on the other side. So that was based partially on the concepts developed by Professor Mańkowski, some student dorms and the student cafeteria. These buildings were completed.
Jeszcze przed latami 90. powstało także miasteczko akademickie,
Before
które też
1990s,
w modelach
for
profesora
the
Cęckiewicza.
student residential areas were erected. So again, it's a whole system.
Wiek XXI, tak? Ponieważ lata 80. przyniosły
We're
stagnację.
in the 21st century.
na szeroką skalę
Not much was
została
happening
zatrzymana.
in 1980s and 90s, so green areas
I w zasadzie
were
nic się tam nie działo
developed
aż
for
do początku XX wieku.
vegetable
W części
and fruit growing
północnej, w niedalekim
plots, small
sąsiedztwie
plots. So, and
akademików
then in the near
zostało
vicinity
zaplanowane
of dorms,
osiedle Akopol.
Akopol residential area was planned for employees of this university. It was supposed to be a concise composition designed by Professor Seruga. Within its short distance, Cogiteon has been recently erected. Cogiteon is a science center. So we have these three consecutive slides demonstrating how the system, spatial system is created in the north of the campus. In the south, in 1997, there was this plan to erect and to create the Kraków Technological Park. Professor Alexander Bem and Krzysztof Bieda, they were the heads of the team working on the coordination plan. The plan was about defining the strategy to develop these areas. So, for this purpose, the area was divided into investment plots on the basis of a functional division, and then main composition axes had to be created for the area, which were largely set out by the patches of high growth greenery. So today's technological park clearly shows that division into plots, but these transportation axes and the composition of green areas, they haven't been introduced. Now about the eastern part of that area. Between 2007 and 2008, a team with Professor Wacław Celadyn designed a conference and exhibition center for that area, but that center has not been developed so far. Then our team in 2016 started working on the guidelines for a new zoning plan. On request of Professor Rector Andrzej Miałkiewicz, that was to support expansion of the technological park. So at that time, the concept was that the southern park would remain a technological park. So this is how our concept fitted into that. So let us look at the technological park now. So it's a one single, uniform, concise architectural form or solid. And actually it looks nowadays much better than it did look in the past 20 years or so. Well, this form has been filled from the inside, and it is beneficial to the overall system and spatial organization. So we have the green areas, these green areas which are characteristic for technological parks. Not far from the technological incubator, and in the Comarch system, there is some greenery, and then the omnipresent vehicles.
I proszę Państwa, kończąc już,
and then finally,
22 rok to nowe podejście do koncepcji.
So a new approach to the concept Technical University of Technology 2100. So that shows the future growth and development of the university and the university's plans for that area. To sum up, the area of the campus is being successfully developed for about 50 years. From the north and from the south. So that resulted in a number of separate composition systems, and they have different styles. Well, the presence of greenery, high greenery, shows that the contrast between these developments is being highly reduced, and greenery represents an important element of the background in the urban structure. What is characteristic, there is very little transportation, and the nearest public transport stops are within a distance of 1 kilometer.
Ta zieleń wysoka jest, natomiast reszta zieleni jest nieurodzona. No i pytanie w takim razie,
now the question is,
ponieważ jest to wynikowa,
what was the reason for such a status quo? Well, that area fell victim to the changes in the strategic approaches to these areas. So strategic projects were either embarked on and then abandoned, or initiated and transformed. As a result, we have a mosaic of fragmented interventions. And now the greatest challenge is this project is to come up with coherent or public or semi-public space that will integrate the campus as a whole. So I presented all these concepts going back to 1970s until the current concept by Professor Kapecki. So in all these concepts we have that green part, spatial framework connecting these parts. So now the question is about the method. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bardzo dziękuję za tę interesującą
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation.
Dyskusja, która wiecznie trwa o urbanistyce i o
that is this never-ending debate about urban planning and this urban continuity with a well-planned urban concept, urban development concept should be fulfilled. Otherwise, it disrupts the space. So it's so important for developing the space that we live in. Ladies and gentlemen, 5 minutes, 3 minutes for the debate.
Już bez dyskusji?
Not really, no, not really.
godzinę 12:45, bo przepraszamy bardzo, taka wyjątkowa
It's already
sytuacja.
1:45. We do apologize. The situation is quite exceptional today. Unfortunately, we cannot prolong our discussion. We have time allotted for lunch, and then we start another event, our celebration. We want to ensure that all of you have a chance to eat something in the lunch break. So,
Pamiętając o tym,
bearing in mind
wyzwaniu,
the challenges
100 lat Politechniki Krakowskiej, mam nadzieję,
inherent to the 100th anniversary of the University of Technology, we hope to go on for 100 years. I would like to thank you for your attendance and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
Dziękujemy bardzo. Tym sposobem
Thank you. And we are closing our conference for this year. I hope to see you again next year or best even sooner.